Hi, this is Yavi Caro, and welcome to another episode of the Hardcore Soft Skills Podcast. Tell me about your workplace. Are you in a place where there are rarely any conflicts? Things are good on the surface, that is. Or are you in a place where there are multiple fights? Or perhaps you are in a place where conflict, that is, different ideas, are welcome, and this is a good thing. My guest today agrees that conflict can be a great tool for teams. Karin Hurt is the co author alongside David Dye of the book Powerful Phrases for Dealing with Workplace Conflict. She is the founder of Let's Grow Leaders, a global human centered leadership development company known for practical tools and training that sticks. After this episode, you will learn tactics to deal with various situations of workplace conflicts that you can share with your team members so conflict is not equal to fighting. Let's listen. Okay, wonderful. Thank you so much, Karen, for being here on the podcast today.
Oh, absolutely. My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I loved your books. And I wanted to talk about a lot about conflict, and you provide great recommendations. But before we get started, I wanted to know from you, and I'm sure our listeners right now want to know in terms of, tell us a little bit about you in terms of why did you decided to choose what you do, your career path.
Okay. Yeah. So before founding Let's Grow Leaders 11 years ago, no, this is all about to make me sound very old when you add up all the math, but I was at Verizon for 2 decades. And so the first decade was all HR stuff, leadership development, organizational development, led a large training organization, merger integration, all the things, everything but compensation. And then I went and led a variety of field roles. So I had a 2,200 person sales team, a 10,000 person customer service organization. And in my last role there, I was in charge of leading the transformation of all our BPO outsourced call centers. So basically, all the organizations that were taking Verizon's calls, but they weren't Verizon employees. And I was asked to take on that role because Verizon had just started selling the iPhone. AT&T had had exclusive rights before that. And all these call centers had just ramped up super, super fast.
Mhm.
And you don't have to be a customer services expert to know that you really can't put up a 500 or 1,000 person call center in 30 days and have a beautiful customer experience. So they called me and they're like, we have an emergency. Can you come fly around, visit all these organizations and figure out which ones to close? And I was like, ugh, that sounds like a terrible job for me, human-centered leader. But I said, but I knew somebody was going to get that job. So I said this, I will take on that role under two conditions. One, I get to hire the directors that are working under me on my team because I only wanted human-centered leaders. And two, we're going to say our mission is to get to parity with internal centers no matter who takes the call. So I'm not going to try to fire people. I'm going to help these organizations succeed. And so as we were doing that, I, was noticing, like I had to make things super practical because these are low margin companies that have to have their people on the phone most of the time. They're in a state of emergency because their quality isn't where they need to be. I could pull everybody offline for, a week-long training, which is not going to happen. So I was like, how do you coach when you only have 5 minutes? How do you create connection in a very short period of time? And as I was doing that, I'm like writing down and creating tools. And so in my last role, we get to parity of internal centers. So that's what happens. And it's pretty amazing. I'm learning so much along the way, but I am writing this blog too.
Mhm.
And the blog takes off and it gets an international following. And people started calling. They're like, can you be our keynote speaker? Can you come teach my company how to do this? When are you writing your book? And I was like, oh no, I have this big job. I can't do that. Well, one thing led to another. And I started to think, well, maybe I could. Right. And so I did. I stayed at Verizon a year longer after I started the blog. And then I gave Verizon 4 months notice that I was going to leave. And I left and I started Let's Grow Leaders. And now we work with human-centered leaders all over the globe. And we're all about really practical tools and techniques because I know that's what people need.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, what were the topics that you were addressing on the Let's Grow Leaders blog?
So it started with our first book was called Winning Well: A Manager's Guide to Getting Results Without Losing Your Soul. So how do you get results and stay a decent human being along the way? So, and if you read my not that I suggest that you do this because my articles have gotten way better than they were at the beginning. I sometimes laugh, but I was really ranting against toxic courage crushing behavior. Like, you don't have to do that. Don't be a jerk. It's not going to work. You might get results for a minute, but it's not going to stay. Right. But saying that is not enough unless you give people the tools to do that. So, how do you land in the and, showing up to any situation with confidence and humility, focused on results and relationships? A lot of how do you have an accountability conversation in a way that is going to inspire people to be accountable and not just intimidate them into being accountable? How do you run meetings to get results and people want to attend? So that was our first content, was all that kind of stuff, and we still spend a lot of time teaching those. And then we moved more in. I know you said you were reading Courageous Cultures, which is the book before the one we're here to talk about. And that was all about how do you create environments of psychological safety where people feel free to speak up and share their ideas. And so how do you encourage courage? And we've been doing a lot of really neat work. I just got back from Southeast Asia and did a whole tour there about courageous cultures and courageous leadership. And it's interesting to see how things are exactly the same and also very different across cultures when it comes to speaking up, and so that's been very interesting. And so my husband and I do this work together. We fell in love writing our first book, Winning Well,
Nice.
and so merged our businesses together. And now we co-author and do work on growing leaders.
Nice. And yeah, as you describe a lot of the things in terms of what we're dealing internationally with workplace conflict. So I want to understand we usually tend to see conflict as a bad word, as a bad thing. So, what are some of the positive effects of dealing with conflict and the negative effects of conflict management overall in a workplace?
Yeah. So conflict is just we have two different points of view or opinions about something. We disagree. That in and of itself is not bad. It's how we handle the conversations that where it gets wonky and that people get scared, right? But my husband and I have we're very much aligned in our values. We're aligned in our writing, but we have very different perspectives and different personalities, and we are in constant conflict, but it's not bad conflict, right? So it's the conflict between, I want to have a big audacious vision and move super fast. And he's like, we better slow this down and get it right and get the operational legs behind this thing, or it's not going to work. That's conflict, but that's good, right? That's really healthy. It's how do you talk to one another about that? How do you get to the innovation that comes on the other side of that kind of conflict? But I think that what mostly people think of when they think of conflict is, I'm in a disagreement. I'm not getting what I want, and I don't know how to talk about it. And so it's creating stress. So, we did this World Workplace Conflict and Collaboration Survey as we were preparing to write the book. And we asked people to think about a conflict that they had in the past, one that, and what would they do? Something that was significant. And what would they do differently if they were faced with that same or similar conflict again? And it was interesting. 55% said they would stay calm. And 21% said, I would talk about it or talk about it sooner. And both of those, in order to stay calm in a conflict and in order to talk about it, you need practical ways to do that. And so that is really what we are all about, giving people. So often we'll be coaching people. And I imagine this happens to you all the time. And people are like, just give me the words. Just tell me what to say. Right? Yeah. And, you can't script every conflict, but you can give people a framework to think about it.
Yeah. And you mentioned in the book about the walking into a conflict, because if you're already riled up, you have a conflict or disagreement with somebody because of differing ideas of how to manage a project or a solution. So how do we, what's the first step that you recommend in terms of like, okay, let's walk into conflict, let's not start screaming at each other or something like this?
Yeah. So the first is start with the questions that you would ask yourself. And I think that taking a beat to do that can really make a difference. Why does what you have to say matter? Okay. So ground it in what is why is what you have to say important? Because if you don't, and if you're like, well, it doesn't really matter, then maybe you don't need to have the conflict. Let it go, right? They chose chocolate cake and you would have preferred strawberry, but it doesn't really matter. And I let it go. I just don't have the cake, right? So that helps to ground in the values of the conversation. What's at stake if you stay silent? Because this is, what's at stake for you and your influence? What's at stake for your values? What's at stake for your relationship with this other human being? Because just shutting up and not saying something is not necessarily the best thing for that other person or the relationship. And what's at stake for the results? And then how will you feel on the other side of that conflict once you've had the conversation? You've been heard, even if you didn't get exactly what you want, you've been heard. How do you feel? And when we ask that question, people are like, I feel relieved is the number one answer we get there. So that's where I would start before I even got into the conversation. And then we talk about 4 dimensions of collaboration. And the next thing I would do is say, which of these dimensions are needed here? And so one is connection. Are we connected at a human level? And that's, are we connected in our bigger context of our relationship? But how do I connect as I start this conversation? And we have some greatest of all time, powerful phrases that I can talk about with that. So connection. The next is clarity. Do we have a shared understanding of success? Curiosity. Are we really genuinely curious about other people's perspectives and what's possible? Are we open to different ways of doing this? And then commitment. How are we going to align on a clear path forward? And so that's what I would start. Like, what's needed here is that, do we need connection? Do we need clarity? Do we need curiosity? Probably you don't start with commitment, but which of those levers you're going to pull.
Okay, so you mentioned connection, curiosity, commitment. Clarity was another one of them?
Yep.
Okay. And you mentioned about phrases. I want to get to like the phrases that you talk about in the book, powerful phrases for dealing with workplace conflict. So let's talk about a few scenarios in terms of the for example, if we have a conflict, disagreement with another coworker about particular ideas or way to, we have different views of how to execute a project. How could we go ahead and, we walked in with that kind of trying to ask ourselves those questions that you described. So what is next?
Okay, so that's a good one and a common one. We have different approaches of how we should do this project. So first thing I would start with is connection. So one GOAT, greatest of all time, powerful phrase for this is, I really care about, and then whatever it is that you genuinely care about. So I really care about you, if you do. I really care about this project. I really care about our work together. Say something that you genuinely care about, and then say, and I'm confident we can find a solution that will work here. So you are starting in now they've got, if you have been acting like a jerk and then you say, I really care about, they're not going to believe it. So it's got to be real. But assuming that's real, that's where I would start with a human connection. And then another connection phrase is, they're like, I really think we should do it this way. A good phrase there is, oh, tell me more. Right. So you're showing that you are genuinely interested in what they have to say before you go push for your idea. You're going to get a chance. Trust the process that you're going to get a chance. And then you can do a reflect to connect, which is, okay, so what I hear you're saying is we should do this approach, and this would be the benefit of doing that approach. Do I have that right? Okay. You haven't agreed with them. You're just showing that you've heard them. So those are 3 GOATs, greatest of all time, for connection. Then the next thing I would move to is clarity. What would a successful outcome do for you? So you're not just asking, what does success look like? Although that's in there, but it's, what is their motivation for doing it that way? So, maybe their reason they want to do it is they've just invested in, they're now a black belt in Lean Six Sigma, and they want to use their stuff, right? Like,
Mhm.
I want to be able to practice my stuff with the thing. And so if that's really a motivation, you want to understand that, because if you are proposing all these solutions that don't let them do what they want to do,
Mhm.
then you're not. So it helps you streamline that. And so I think starting with those two would be good. And then you can move to curiosity. So what does this look like from your perspective? Or what do you suggest we do next? Which you might not have to ask, because you might have gotten that in the early ones. And then, the final is to move to some kind of a commitment. Like, what's one first step here we can both agree on? Right.
Mhm.
And then you could say, and so let's do that. And then let's check in again and pick a time to see how it's going. That commitment one can be very helpful, because if it goes sideways, you don't have to get the courage to initiate another conversation, because you've already scheduled it. If it is going well, you don't have to remember to celebrate and say thank you, because you've already scheduled it.
Mhm.
So that's one way to approach.
Yeah, that sounds great. And it seems, in terms of walking in to not defend our idea, my idea, I'm going to win, but more from the place of curiosity and a place of kind of finding common ground in general.
If you show up really genuinely curious and people believe that you have the best interest of them and the project at heart, human nature is they're going to show up curious back.
Mm-hmm.
Like, if you say, "Oh, well, what does this look like from your perspective?" and they tell you, and then most truthful human beings will say, "And what does it look like from your perspective?" So, try. I mean, unless you're dealing with a psychopath, and really speaking, you're probably not.
Well, that's a good point in terms of the when do we know how do we de-escalate if it's, let's say, it's getting a little heated, or the other person's kind of like in a very defensive approach. What are some ways that we can de-escalate that conflict
Yeah.
a
So
bit?
the first thing from a de-escalation perspective is I always try to pay attention to my face, my body language, and my tone of voice. Because if somebody's coming to you and they're really fired up and their voice is screaming, and you go in a very open, calm manner, "Oh, wow, tell me more." Or you do it for like, "It sounds like you're really upset about this. I don't want you to be upset. So let's talk about it." And it's a jujitsu move. If
Mhm.
they're unlikely just to keep screaming if you are the voice of calm. Right.
Mhm.
And works great with kids too, by the way.
You need to try that.
uh,
Yeah.
so that's the first thing. And then, then to really show up curious, that you and demonstrate that you're actively listening to them. That is the next thing. And then they're afraid, if they won't stop, you could say, "Hey, I've noticed," and then notice what you see. "I've noticed you've pounded your hand on the desk 7 times.
Mhm.
I noticed that you're speaking very loudly. I noticed that you used the F-bomb 4 times in this conversation. I'm curious. What's
Mhm.
going on?" And then you can ask for what you need. I'd love to be able to have this conversation in a way, like two mature adults, that so that we can really get to a common solution here. Can
Mhm.
we agree? Yes, for commitment. Can we agree that we're going to stop yelling?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that sounds like a good approach, and kind of take being calm, because yes, if we're both at the same level of heated, it's time to just step away,
Yeah.
probably.
Yes.
And how about in situations where it's a boss, like it's either somebody who's a micromanager,
Mhm.
or a person who just kind of like a bully type? What are some powerful phrases that we could use in a situation where it's our manager, leader, that we have to deal with conflict with?
Yeah. So the first, let's take them both separately, because I think you handle them a little bit differently. So you're dealing with a micromanager. The first question I would ask is, "Are you really?" And here's what I mean. So you can imagine, in my line of work, I talk to people from both sides of the story. Somebody will come to me like, "Oh my gosh, my boss is a micromanager on my back all the time." And then I go talk to the boss and they're like, "Oh my gosh, why do I have to micromanage this person? They're not doing their work." Right. So the
Mm.
first question I would say, is your performance where it needs to be? Or are you bringing on the micromanaging? That is the first question. So let's assume, nope, you are really dealing with a micromanager. The next thing you can do is get really curious about why they are. Like, so, "Hey, I've noticed I noticed that you've been checking in on this. You deal a lot with project managers. Like I know you notice you've checked in on this project 4 times in the last 3 days. I've given you the same update. I'm curious, what's going on? What does this look like from your perspective? What else do you need? Do you need different information? Do you need, do we need to set up a cadence of communication so I'm proactively giving you what you need? Do I need to give this to you in bullet points so you can go tell the stakeholders? Because here's the thing, I really care about this project. I want us both to be successful. And this is what it's like to be me right now. Every time I have to stop and give you these updates, it's taking me away from the team, from the work, whatever is happening. So how can we create a situation where I'm going to give you what you need so you have faith that everything's on target and I get the freedom to do what I need to do? And, if you say that with the right tone of voice, your manager doesn't want to be checking up on you all the time too, right? So that's part of it. And usually when you ask that kind of thing, you find out more information that you can then do something with. It may be like, oh yeah, I got the board of directors breathing down our neck here. Or, you know what, there's a lot, my boss is not happy with the way this project is going. All right, that's good to know. I'm sorry that that's true. How can I help? Because so you're asking for what you need, but you're starting by giving them what they need. So that's a micromanager. I'm curious about you. How would you answer that one, a micromanager? Because you probably have to deal with this kind of thing a lot.
Well, I think that's a great question because I think it's usually, to be honest, sometimes I will get defensive in terms of like, what do you mean? But no, but in particular, a good approach would be to talk to the person in terms of what you describe in terms of what are they really asking for?
Yeah.
Like it seems that there's a concern and going from the place of empathy as well, because probably they're nervous, they're a new, if in the case that you're a new person coming into the team.
Yep.
So that probably is want to understand, like, I understand you don't know me. I want to understand what things do we need to take care of first. So I think it's coming from a place of empathy. Have to try to understand what are the real concerns of that person, because they're nervous. They want to get that work done. They want to feel like micromanaging could be the way.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. So let's take your next one. So you've got, you said micromanager and somebody who's like screaming at you all the time, right? So we have a chapter in the book. What if my boss is a dropper of F-bombs? And, so there I would notice the behavior. Like, so I would say, hey, like I've noticed that you're screaming a lot. I've noticed that you're using the F-bomb a lot. That can't be good. Right? So I am curious, like, how can I make it so that you're not so upset? Like, what can I do to be more helpful here? And then if they're like, no, that's me, I just get fired up. And honestly, not that I scream F-bombs, but when I am like fired up about something, I know I get fired up because I'm a very energetic person. And, like my team will be like, all right, like, can you lower it down a minute? So then that's for what you need, right? So it doesn't make me perform better when you scream at me, right? This is what I need. What I need, it's honestly, it stresses me out. It escalates. And I spend more time worrying about being upset than getting my work done. So what I could really use is a calmer environment here. It was interesting. We do this thing called mini personal experiments with our clients. And we ask them, and we talk about this in Courageous Cultures, we ask them to, pick one thing that they're going to do that feels a little scary because it's out of their comfort zone, but it's not that hard. And one CEO we worked with had a mini personal experiment to not cuss because he was a F-bomb dropper. And what he did is he's like, every time I want to say the F word, I'm going to say, and he made up some nonsense word like pickle juice or something, right? I'm going to say pickle juice instead. And it immediately de-escalated it because it communicated two things. I'm so mad that I want to cuss, but it's also a funny word, so it makes people laugh. But people still took it seriously. They're like, all right, why are you so upset?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's good. I try that with my kids too. When I want to say F fudge, and so, so now a couple other examples that I want to that probably are regular in terms of gossip at work. How do you either confront that person who's gossiping? How do you deal with that in the workplace?
Yeah. So I had this happen to me. And this was the very weird scenario. It was years ago, and I was leading my sales team, and I was in a situation where I had been brought in, and I was one of very few women directors in the sales organization. And I did not have any sales experience. I had a lot of culture and leadership experience. So I was brought in because of being able to do good culture change. And they knew the sales results would come. But I had very little credibility with these, all these guys who have been doing sales for their whole career. So it was just, that's why people gossip. There's some reason that there's something, right? Well, the weird rumor that they came up with was that I was I was married to a man.
Mm-hmm.
The rumor was that I was having sex
Mm-hmm.
with the only other female on the team.
Ooh, wow. Okay. That's
And then we were going to go on vacation to Jamaica together.
wow.
So I thought humor is the best way to go. I was just like, wow, what you have made up sounds way more exciting than what I have going on next week, which involves schlepping to daycare and all these things, right? Like, like that. That would be an interesting movie to watch, but it's not my
Yeah.
and and if I were to go to Jamaica, it would be with my husband
Uh-huh.
and toddler, and and
Yeah.
so that did it in that
Mhm.
case, because I just said it out loud, like, I hear this rumor and it's
Mhm.
not true, so
Mhm.
knock it off, right?
Mhm.
But I think so that's the one way to do it. But I think it depends on the nature of the rumor, right? And how serious it is. And also if there's a truth to the rumor, because that also is tricky. So sometimes gossip is about something true. And sometimes gossip can be, people are gossiping about an organizational change or something that's going to happen. You have confidential information about it, but you can't say anything.
Mhm.
And, in that case, one of the things that you can do is say, hey, there are some changes that are about to happen. And I honestly, I am not at liberty to share them for this reason, because we want to make sure that everything is organized before, before and there's still a lot of moving parts, a lot of decisions to be made here. So I trust me that what you're making up, if this is true, is far worse than what's about
Mhm.
to happen. Right. So you're not disclosing any information, but you're settling down the
Mhm.
conversation.
Yeah, that's good examples in terms of just tackling it up front and instead of letting continue. And how about in terms of as a manager, if you want to deal with lazy people, either could be a teammate as well, but if you want to go ahead and how to manage a person and you think they're not pulling their end of deal in terms of work.
Yeah, so we use what we call the INSPIRE method for accountability conversations, and so this can be used at any time there is a behavior that you're looking to change, but it follows the C's. So it starts with a connection. In this case, you're going to connect to the human, just like you do with any of the others, but you're also going to connect to the intent for the conversation. So, hey, my intent for this conversation is to talk about your performance in this area. My intent for this conversation is to help you get your sales results where they need to be. My intent for this conversation is to improve the way you're talking to our customers on the phones. Whatever it is, you just say it, and not a lot, direct.
Mhm.
And or I really care about your career and I want you to be successful. And my intent for this conversation is to give you some feedback about how you're being perceived by others in our meetings. Okay.
Mhm.
So that's initiate. And so that's connection. And then you're going to connect to whatever the behavior is. I've noticed, and you give what you've noticed. So let's just play through somebody is lazy, right? I've noticed that in as you do, your productivity measures are a third of the rest of the team, right? Or whatever it is that you're noticing.
Mhm.
And then the real magic, and then you give specific examples, like here's the data, or if there's a behavior like you're coming in late and they're leaving early. I've noticed that you've been rolling in half hour after your shift starts and leaving a half hour before your shift starts. So you notice the behavior and then you provide specific examples. That's all connect. Then you show up curious. And this is where this is where the magic of the model is. You're going to be genuinely curious about what's going on with an open-ended question. What's going on? I wonder why this keeps happening. Now, the key is to be really curious here, because the thing is, you probably don't know what's going on. You may have ideas, and it could be they say, "Ooh, I don't know what's going on," right? Or you could get information like, "Yeah, I'm sick," or, something else. So depending on what you hear in that curiosity is what you do next. The thing about the curiosity is you want to really make sure that even if they say they've got nothing, you let that silence sit for a minute and don't keep talking, because that's the biggest mistake people often make. They're like, "What's going on? Why does this keep happening?" Well, it's really a problem, right? Right. So, and then you invite them to come up with a solution. That's psychology 101. People are way more likely to do a behavior change if they came up with it. So, all right, what do you think you could do to get your productivity up to the rest of the team? And then the end of the model is review and enforce. Okay, so what I hear you say you're going to do is this. Great. Let's check in on this in 3 weeks and see how your solution is working. You're scheduling the finish and you go moving to that commitment phase. So it's connection, curiosity, commitment.
That's wonderful. And I think all that you have described today could pretty much apply to either on-site or remote working environments? Or are there any considerations that we should have in terms of working remote and how to manage conflict there?
Good question. So yes, all these techniques work that way too. I would say the biggest thing is pick your medium. And what do I mean by that? Marshall McLuhan is a famous communication researcher. Back in the 60s, he said the medium is the message. And I think that's more true now than ever before. So if you're having a conflict with someone, this is not where you should go back and forth on text message, right? Turn on the camera, look them in the eye, and have a reasonable conversation. People instead, though, are hiding behind the technology. And you see that all over TikTok, right? People are like, "Oh my God, my boss fired me, over Slack." Right? That's inappropriate. So the more intense the conversation, the higher bandwidth communication. Do you need to go there in person? Do you need to turn the cameras on? These are for more sensitive conversations. So that's the first thing about remote work. The second thing I would say is there needs to be more clarity conversations. A lot of conflict comes from an expectation violation. So imagine you and I are, I report to you, and we're showing up for one-on-one meetings, and you're not turning your camera on. Now, we don't have a norm. We don't have an expectation. We've never said whether cameras should be on or off, possibly. But I've got an interpretation like, wow, she doesn't even care about me enough to turn her camera on. And you're like, thank goodness I have such a deep relationship with Karin. She doesn't, I can finally have a break and eat my lunch and turn my camera off because surely she'll understand. But meanwhile, I've got this whole story going and you aren't trying to do anything bad. So in this kind of circumstance, what we're really finding is there needs to be more conversations about what our expectations in this remote world. And what happened was so many organizations pivoted so fast to remote work, they didn't do it as deliberately as if they had done it not in a world health crisis. Yeah. So people are now saying, oh, we have a work from anywhere policy. It's no problem. You can work from anywhere, which is fine until you notice that your coworker who you have been waiting for this report from them for 3 days is taking a picture of them on a Zoom call at a petting zoo, right? And they've got a pony, petting a pony on one hand, they've got the Zoom in the other, and they've posted it on LinkedIn, and it's got 500 likes, and everybody's commenting back and forth. And by the way, this coworker is commenting back and forth to every person, and you're sitting there, where in the world is my report? right?
Mhm.
And so that is an expectation. Can we really work from anywhere? And if we can work from anywhere, what are our expectations? Well, our expectations, we're not going to be hanging out at petting zoos or on social media. We're going to be getting our work done.
Mhm.
And so what we call these conflict cocktails, but there's a whole new breed of these conflict cocktails, and it's coming from expectations that were never clarified. So you're back to that clarity set of things.
Yeah, very important, especially setting the clarifying conversations, and that could help definitely remote or on site. So, thank you so much for all this advice. This is such great information, and I advise the listeners to go ahead and get a copy of your book because it's just very it's the actionable items. It's like read this before you get into work today. so, so what's the best way for people to get in contact with you or learn more about your work?
Awesome. Thank you so much. Yeah, the book is called Powerful Phrases for Dealing with Workplace Conflict: What to Say Next to De-Stress the Workday, Build Collaboration, and Calm Difficult Customers. And it is available everywhere books are sold, including on obviously Amazon. And it is read by us. If you're an audio, most times when people are podcast listeners, they like audiobooks. So
Mhm.
it is read by David and I on Audible, and it's also on Kindle as well as the paperback. And our website is letsgrowleaders.com. And if you go to that and you go to books, you can download free sample chapters. And we have all these resources that we've built to go with the book so people can read the book together and do activities and write their own goals and build their own conflict cocktail. So it's a great thing for teams to do if you're looking for something to do as a team.
Well, thank you so much for being here with me on the podcast today.
Oh, absolutely. My pleasure. Thanks so much for taking the time to talk with me.
Yeah. Thank you for listening today. Before you leave, make sure you go to my website, hardcoresoftskillspodcast.com, and sign up for my weekly newsletter. Then go to the review tab and leave a review. It is the way to ensure this podcast is discovered by others. Remember that by learning soft skills, you make your hard skills work for you. See you next time.